Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Val McRoberts, Director of Ziptales. I'm very pleased to have you here and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. Today we're delighted to present a seminar on preventing bullying, prepared by my colleague Richard. Richard was the publisher of The Hidden Hurt, the anti-bullying book put out by Wizard Books some years ago. He was also the editor of Altogether Now, Ziptales' own anti-bullying resource, a DVD and CD kit. He is the creative director of Ziptales and author of many educational texts for various publishers. All participants will be emailed a PD certificate for attending today. If you're sitting around in the staff room with other staff, make sure you email us a list of all your staff members' names and emails of those who attended. Let's get started.
Bully-proof your school. The significance of bullying. What do the following people have in common? Woody Allen, Roald Dahl, Walt Disney, Mel Gibson, Clive James, Ruth Park, Julia Roberts, Steven Spielberg, Whitney Houston. That's right, they were all bullied at school. It's not a modern phenomenon. Walt Disney went to school in the 1910s, a state school in Missouri. Roald Dahl was in school in the 1920s, an expensive private school in England. Ruth Park was at a Catholic school in New Zealand in the 1920s. Clive James went to a Sydney school in the 1940s, and so it goes. In all these cases, they went on to great things, leaving the scars of bullying behind. But if even famous people had to put up with it, what about ordinary kids? 1 in 5 children worldwide are bullied on a regular basis. It happens in the playground, on the road to school, in the classroom, and on the internet. It's a silent epidemic. In this session, we'll be looking at what bullying is, what its dynamics are, and how to combat it. At the end of the seminar, we'll be giving participants a number of downloadable PDFs and videos to help deal with the problem. This seminar covers the following. What is bullying? How common is bullying? Why do bullies bully? Who are the victims? What are the effects of bullying? Does your school have a problem? Possible remedies to bullying. Recruiting the bystanders. A whole school anti-bullying policy. And what about cyberbullying? Let's get started. What is bullying? The usual categorization runs to 3 types. Physical bullying, punching, kicking, pushing, damaging belongings, etc. Verbal bullying, name-calling, teasing, insulting, racist or sexist remarks. Emotional bullying, spreading rumours, exclusion from social groups, mockery, manipulation of friendship groups, etc. And cyberbullying, using social media sites or emails or texting to abuse others online. Both sexes are involved in bullying, though boys are more inclined to do it. Bullies tend to be more aggressive than normal children. They have little empathy and are keen to dominate others. Boys tend to be more physical and direct in their methods. Girls tend to be more inclined to use verbal and psychological techniques such as social exclusion or hurtful words. Bullying is distinct from ordinary quarrelling or disputation in 3 important ways. It is deliberate or premeditated, hurt, not accidental. It is persistent, that is, repeated at regular intervals, and it involves a power imbalance between the person bullying and the person bullied. One is stronger than the other and is abusing that advantage. This is the reason why the person bullied cannot defend him or herself. Dr. Ken Rigby, Australia's foremost expert on the subject, gives a simple but effective definition. Bullying, he says, is repeated oppression, psychological or physical, of a less powerful person by a more powerful person or group of persons. Let's have a look at some activities. For lower primary students, I would recommend the Happy Schools suite of videos and lessons on Ziptales, which is to be found in the Developing Library F2. These use Muppets and simple diagrams to explain the key concepts. They can be streamed live to the class at an appropriate time. This suite, the Happy School suite, also offers topic-specific worksheets for classroom use. In terms of stories, Ziptales offers a wide range of stories with bullying themes embedded in the storyline that can be used to springboard class discussions about identifying and dealing with bullying behaviour. For years F to 2, The Billy Goat's Gruff, The Three Little Pigs and Snow White, all to be found in the developing library F to 2. For years 3 and 4, Danny's New Glasses, A Laugh a Day, Jamie's Secret and The New Girl, all to be found in People Stories. These stories also have follow-up worksheets available that address bullying themes in the story. And for years 5 and 6, The Case of the Fancy Dress Fiend, The Case of the Battered Bully, The Case of the Crazy Codes. They're in the extending library 3 to 6. How common is bullying? Here's the bad news. In Australia, 27% of children between years 4 and 7 report being bullied regularly, so that's 1 in 4 children. The peak in primary school is at year 5, 32%. In most cases, 87%, other children are witnesses to what is happening. Rigby says that 1 in 7 children have a regular experience of bullying. International research shows a consistent rate of between 10 and 15% of all children being subject to bullying at least once a week. Teasing and name-calling are the most common forms, but much more serious forms occur as well. Why do bullies bully? This is the big question. It is tempting to see children who bully as damaged individuals, and often they are. They might come from families with patterns of violence or overt aggression, or where they are treated badly themselves. They might have seen violence, or at least dominance, modelled by adults and think that's the way it's done. They might even have been influenced by the wider community in subtle ways. Adulation of violence in movies and computer games, social stigmas against weak or nerdy people which they feel impelled to copy. I'll show that weak guy sort of idea. Equally, it might be a secret feeling of weakness or envy or anger which they are anxious to get on top of by proving to themselves that they are bigger or smarter or prettier or with more friends and therefore better than others. It is all about dominance. In terms of the psychology of the typical bully, there is a high likelihood that they are narcissistic. They think everything revolves around their own needs. Impulsive. They act without thinking. Lacking in empathy. They don't feel bad about hurting others. Aggressive and angry. They want to lash out. These, by the way, are some of the known characteristics of sociopaths. And it is no coincidence that there's a strong link between school bullying and later dysfunction, violence, crime, misuse of drugs and alcohol, and so on. Who are the children bullied? Theorists are very uncomfortable with the word victim, which tends not to be used these days. Indeed, the word bully is frowned upon. Why? Because both words connote a permanent or inherent trait. A bully is always a bully, a victim is always a victim. And as my first examples, Roald Dahl, Walt Disney, etc., suggested, this is not the case. Most children who are bullied will survive the experience and go on to fulfilled lives. Most children who bully will gradually adjust to more normal social interaction and not end up in jail. But yes, there are children who are bullied on a daily basis. What are they like? They tend to exhibit these characteristics. They are different from their peers, physically, in appearance, dress, ethnicity, accent, sexual orientation, belonging to a low-status group, and either less competent than the average or perversely more competent, the tall poppy syndrome. They may be anxious and insecure, easily frightened and intimidated, and of course children can spot this vulnerability instinctively in their target's verbal and body language. And they may have low self-esteem and confidence, thinking they're not good enough and have no status with the group. This is encoded in every word they say and every gesture. Needless to say, these features are very widespread in the school population. Who, after all, has not had moments of doubt or fear or feeling not right, or at least not like the others? What are the effects of bullying? It is here that we come to the sad part. The list is a long one. Physical problems, from cuts and bruises through to stomach or headaches and rashes, stress-related illness of course, loss of appetite, comfort eating, and even occasionally self-harm. Psychological problems, being withdrawn and moody, irritable, aggressive, not wanting to go to school, difficulty sleeping, worrying obsessively, loss of motivation, low self-esteem, panic attacks, relationship problems, depression, even occasionally suicidal thoughts. And problems with study. They associate school with the problem and pull back from effective engagement. So they show impaired concentration, decreased performance, and in some cases they miss school with its obvious negative consequences on grades, either by way of truancy or fake illnesses. To take one example, children who were bullied were 5 times more likely to be depressed than those who were not. Some studies have suggested that children who have been bullied are more likely to be depressed even into adulthood. Although long-term studies of sustained bullying and its overall effect on children over time are rare, it is such a complicated problem. The consensus is that it can be a crippling burden. Although it seems an odd thing to say, bullying also has deleterious effects on the bully too. Bullies are not winners. They have a high incidence over years of antisocial behaviour, including criminal behaviour in later years, 60% in one study, as well as depression, aggression, and other problems. Let's look at some activities. As an add-on for this webinar, there are a number of teaching instruments. Here are some useful ones. Peter's story about boy bullying, an educomic with questions. Evita's story, girl bullying, an educomic with questions. What is bullying? A quiz with suggested answers. These are all handouts, of course, for the class. Does your school have a problem? Now we come to the tricky part. Let me say that I believe that most schools do all they can. Teachers, except for a regrettable few, have the interests of children at heart and sincerely believe that they are doing all they can. But this following piece is from Psychology Today, an article called What Parents Can Do When Bullying is Downplayed at School. Maybe it's just America, but maybe not. And this is a quote from the magazine, from the periodical. Despite the bully-free zone posters that line the school walls and the zero-tolerance policy, your experience is that the school would rather not address the problem at all. The responses you get from your child's teacher include bland lip service, such as, "I didn't see it happening, and I can't just take your child's word that it did. Kids will be kids, you know. This stuff just happens. It'll all blow over soon. Your child just needs to have a thicker skin. The child you're accusing of bullying is a great student. I just can't believe he would do such a thing. Are you sure your child isn't exaggerating?" More and more, as I talk with parents whose children have experienced bullying, they share this common experience of having their concerns downplayed by the very adults who are charged with keeping school children safe. One recent study reports that in school settings, bullying is missed by adults 96% of the time. How can this be, many parents ask? Easier than it seems, I'm afraid. While most teachers are very focused on what goes on in their classrooms, the majority of bullying occurs in locations like the locker room, the lunchroom, the playground, the bathroom, the hallways, the bus, and perhaps most famously, online. When classroom teachers tell concerned parents they're not aware of bullying incidents taking place in their classroom, they're usually just telling the truth. That comes from Signe Whitson. So that's a quote from Psychology Today. You can see that there is a concern out there, and I'm drawing attention to this because I think we need to acknowledge it. Is it possible that the anti-bullying policy in your school is gathering dust? That teachers are just not seeing most of what goes on? That the bullies are so good at covering their tracks the adults don't know? This is a painful suggestion, but it might be a good idea to re-examine the problem afresh. What do the kids say? What are the problem areas? Do the children really have a clear sense of what they are expected to do? Let's turn to the activities because I'd like to follow these up with some handouts. The following resources attached to this webinar provide you with some information packs, and here are three useful ones. Student survey, an anonymous one-page checklist of possible bullying behaviour. My suggestion here is ask the kids, they know. Then, where is it? A possible locator for problem areas. And finally, what would you do? A set of questions to get students thinking. Let's turn to possible remedies. It goes without saying that the child who is bullied cannot solve the problem. It takes adult intervention to begin to change the situation. So what is recommended? Our research paper, one of the handouts to go with this seminar, mentions the following methods. The restorative justice approach, the friendly schools and families approach, the no blame approach, the method of shared concern, the support group approach, and the peer mediators approach. All are well known in the literature. Here are three that can be recommended. The method of shared concern. This method, developed by Dr. Anatol Pikas in Sweden, is a no-blame approach. It involves three stages. Stage 1 involves the teacher or counsellor getting the child who has been bullying, let's call him Z, in for a chat on his or her own, and confronting him or her with the problem that X, the child bullied, is not happy. The problem is, how can Z help change the situation for X? The idea is that Z has not been blamed, but is presented with a challenge: how to make things better. A date is then set for follow-up meetings arranged by the teacher or counsellor, stage 2 in effect, to see how Z has handled the challenge. Is X feeling better? Later again, stage 3 involves all the children involved together: Z, the bully, X, the victim, and Z's support group. The whole situation is supervised by the teacher or counsellor, and any last issues are dealt with. The support group approach. This method, developed in England by Barbara Maines and George Robinson, is also a non-punitive approach. It does not seek to make the bully feel bad, but to engage him or her in the solution. It has three major steps. Step 1, fact-finding. The victim, X, is interviewed by the teacher-counsellor to find out what has been happening and who is involved. This establishes who the perpetrators are, who are bystanders, and who are allies of the bully. Step 2, support group discussions. The group is convened by the teacher-counsellor. It consists of X, Z, Z's allies, and some bystanders. No one is labelled or blamed. But again, the situation, X is not happy, becomes the focus of discussion. How can we help X? All involved are invited to talk about when they felt unhappy at school, and so it becomes a matter of common concern. Step 3, review. A week later, the group reconvenes and there's a check to see if things have improved. The teacher-counsellor then manages the follow-up. Mediation. This is more prone to difficulties than the other two methods because it implies a balance in the relationships and the possibility of fault on both sides, the victim and the bully. The teacher or counsellor acts as an umpire, we might call it, between the two sides. If, however, there's a radical imbalance and the victim is liable to be intimidated by the bully, it may not be a good idea. These are the stages in the mediation. Each party, Z and X, is able to speak without interruption for a sufficient time to establish the basics of the situation. Then, and this is important, Z repeats what X has said. Then X repeats what Z has said. No comments or judgments are made or allowed. The two parties then talk about feelings, how X felt, and Z repeats this, how Z felt, and X repeats this. Finally, the discussion moves on to possible solutions. At the end, both agree on what will happen. Later, of course, there are follow-up meetings and reviews. So, some activities. At the end of this webinar, there are a number of resources. Here are some useful Here are some useful ones regarding anti-bullying intervention. There's one called Managing Students' Responses to Bullying, which gives details of the two main methods above. There's Research into Bullying, all sorts of background information on the topic. And there's a video, An Expert Opinion, a short 6-minute video by Dr. Simone Heaney, a psychologist who specialises in bullying issues. Recruiting the bystanders. As mentioned earlier, nearly all bullying interactions are witnessed by other children. The attitude of the bystanders, the audience if you like, is a key part of what's going on in a bullying situation. Many bullies love playing to the crowd. Now, a tempting response is, why don't the other children intervene and stop the bullying? For very good reasons. They won't act if they feel it's none of their business, they feel it's someone else's job, for example, the teachers, they think they might make matters worse, they feel nothing for the victim, they don't know what to do, or they're scared of the bullying. However, they will act if they feel responsible in some way, they feel empathy for the victim, they are convinced their action is the right one, they have a specifically designed task which they have practiced. There are, of course, a number of student responses, which I could summarise this way. There are heroic responses. I'll stick up for him and tell the bully to get lost. There are compassionate responses. I'll tell her afterwards not to worry and that she's a lovely person. And there are realistic responses. I'll go and get a teacher. Now, it needs to be said that the heroic ones are unlikely to succeed. They are halfway to fantasy land, and worse, they may invite counter-bullying. The advice of experts is that they should be avoided. The compassionate and realistic ones are better value and not particularly dangerous. There is, of course, a problem with reporting bullying, the anti-dobbing culture of many children. This needs to be broken down through specific work over time. You need to say to kids, it's not dobbing, it's rescue. The compassionate response is excellent, though of course it does not affect the bullying itself. That needs to be tackled in ways managed by adults. So, some final activities. As an add-on to this webinar, there are a number of teaching instruments bearing on empathy development and general awareness. Here are some useful ones. The Littlest Monster, a play about bullying for younger children. Good Friends, a set of bullying scenarios for discussion. And The Heavy Coat, a simulation to encourage empathy. A whole school anti-bullying policy. All the research affirms that schools need an anti-bullying policy. I don't wish to suggest that such a thing doesn't already exist, but it's worth revisiting the whole issue on a regular basis. To this end, I would suggest going to the Teacher Resources section of Happy Schools on Ziptales. Go to Happy Schools, click on Teacher Resources, go in, they'll ask you for a password because it's not really for children. Use the password STAFF23, lowercase, STAFF23. One of the printouts is a whole school policy. It's a very useful model for what needs to be discussed by the staff. What about cyberbullying? Unfortunately, this is the downside of the internet, which offers so many other good things. Here we are talking use of Facebook, Instagram and other social network sites to harass, use of chat rooms to leave nasty messages, text messaging to troll others, email to abuse others, even misuse of games such as Minecraft where it's possible to destroy others' work, and so on. The insidious nature of cyberbullying is that it can reach a large audience, not a small group in the playground. It can happen 24/7. Day and night harassment is possible. Bullies can be anonymous. The offensive material can stay up after the bullying is over, and it's very difficult to stop. While we might perhaps think that this sort of virtual bullying is less serious than the schoolyard kind, in fact, experts are very troubled by it. UK research suggests that up to 70% of children and teens have been victims of online bullying. Up to 5% have engaged in self-harm as a result. Some 20% deal with cyberbullying every day. Studies suggest that Facebook is the weapon of choice for young people. This is very unfortunate. And because cyberbullying is an out-of-school issue, it might seem easy to just ignore it. However, to the extent that parents tend to see education as having application to so many aspects of life, it is best to include it in this discussion. Here are some suggestions. Talk carefully about the issue, perhaps using a known case as a lead-in. Ask children for examples of cyberbullying, maybe not personal ones unless the discussion is able to be controlled emotionally. Talk about the negative impacts of online bullying, and draw up a list of online etiquette for everyone to follow. The real agenda of this is similar to the method of shared concern, bringing into the open such behaviour, identifying it as a problem and asking children to find solutions. Websites such as CyberSmart have lots of ideas, and I list them here. Other resources are listed in the website education.gov.au cyber safety. Beyond that, much of the work needs to be done by parents. They need their own education campaigns as well as monitoring children's online behaviour, keeping computers and tablets visible, and even setting up filtering software. The same websites have lots of good suggestions. I trust you found this a useful introduction to the key issues in the matter of bullying. Remember that Ziptales has a whole suite of material dedicated to the subject. It's called Happy Schools. It's to be found in the Developing Literacy Library. The stories on Ziptales which relate to bullying mentioned in this webinar are the subject of a special printable extra sheet. The resources available to follow up are listed in the last slide. Let's hope that on the basis of the ideas outlined in Bully-Proof Your School, the incidence drops dramatically. All the best. Thank you for your time.